This may be a ramble of thoughts, but after recently stumbling on this sub, I finally felt a place that I could offer something that my family and I experienced a few years ago that to this day gives me a shiver. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon, and felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago, my wife, daughter, and 2 German shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs who need the privacy since they are intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, just a nice horseshoe off a USFS road that had flat ground full of trees and a fire pit. The first night, my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the German shepherd, Guts, sleep with her in the tent. That whole first night, neither my wife and I could sleep, and we both heard footsteps, and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around the night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently, before departing, about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols and my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided was deer or maybe some elk. Day 2, morning. We go for a walk down the road and maybe 300 feet away, we see the circle area in the photo. I see an abandoned road where a rusted gate post, which the gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately takes off running down this abandoned road. My heart begins to race because I think it's another family camping like us, and he is going to get himself shot or scare some innocent people to death. So I chase after him as fast as I can, and the rest follow. He stops after 20 feet into the road, and me yelling his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that there is nobody there, and something is off about the sight. I yell, "Hello? Is anyone there? Sorry about the dog." And I got no response. My curiosity gets the best of me, and I have to see what the site conditions were. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, folding table. But every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured, well, someone left in a hurry, and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, a propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, me and my daughter are playing ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have direct line of sight on her, but all of a sudden, I see Guts make a mad dash straight towards her. Normally, he would always be with me unless he's called over, and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening. So I ran over there and my wife starts jogging at me, and I immediately draw my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet before I call him, and he stopped. My other dog, Leah, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I have had her for 7 years, and this was the first time in her life that she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full hair raised and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah is up front bossing everything in her path and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened and she said, "I was trying to pee and all of a sudden, I felt my hairs raise. I know someone was watching me. And then I saw Guts running towards me, and I just got up to move towards you." We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything and saw no trails. Broken branches, nothing to point to what and where something went. We decide we are spending one more night since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we will be all in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put a rope with a makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck and zip-tied it so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie my last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same exact thing I have done with the rope that was so old and brown that I didn't see it at first. It was broken, and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough, it was tied at roughly the same height, 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone has stayed here before and put the same makeshift warning system on the same tree I am, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure that the girls felt we are safe, and at that time, the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we are armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to that now knows that we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target so we can sleep safely. That night, we heard no footsteps, and the dogs never perked up and barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 haunted documentary, and I noticed the cluster smack dab close to where we camped that weekend, and a flood of dread rushes me as I think of that mysterious abandoned campsite with a ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since and have enjoyed the beauty of the NW, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped, and we all thank our lucky stars, Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. Just a little update. Guts is no longer with us. He has journeyed into the next phase. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him and how he saved us. He was a warrior, and his new brother Geronimo has his spirit.
The other night, my mom and I were camping in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We were regulars down there and spend countless hours on the trails and campsites. We decided to try and find a new spot. We ended up all the way down Indian Creek on 9A, almost at the end of the road. We found a beautiful campsite. We're so excited to spend the night there. The first strange thing to happen was that I could not start a fire. I can't tell you how many times I've made a fire before. I've never struggled like this time. I went through 8 campfire matches. They're much larger and hold a fire for 15 minutes. Almost an entire box of regular matches. We had a fire starter block just to make things easier. And dry wood. It took me hours to get it going. I blame the moisture in the air that night. Things continued to get weird. Next, it's 2:18 a.m. My mom wakes me up to say there is someone outside our tent. They have been there for 5 minutes. I wake and see lights shining down into our tent. You can hear a woman's voice. We are both paralyzed with fear. We don't look out. We were down a steep hill, and the lights were coming up from the street, only about 300 feet away. The lights did not go away for another 5 minutes. Finally, the lights and voices were gone. We never heard a car leave. We were on a gravel road in the middle of the night. The nearest campsite is probably 10 walking minutes away. We would have heard a car. Finally, we fall back asleep after being spooked. 4:19, we wake up again to my mom's phone playing music. It sounds like a sad funeral song. But it also sounds like it could have been a ringtone on her phone. Neither of us have heard the song before, and neither of us have alarms set. We do not have service, so her phone is on airplane mode. She picks up the phone. The music just quits playing. She doesn't press any buttons. Her screen is still black. The song just turns off. She didn't receive any notifications from any apps. It's a blank screen. And her music app isn't playing. The next morning, I go through her phone and listen to all the different songs. That song is not anywhere on her phone. So why did this random song start and end playing on her phone? Plus, when I woke her up, she was telling me about her crazy dream of someone coming up to our tent and asking to come inside. This dream happened twice. The first dream, a woman comes up and asks to come inside. My mom then tries to grab something for self-defense, and the tent is so large, she can't get to it. The next dream, a man asks to come into our tent for just a minute. He says he will leave soon. But when she grabs something for her defense, it crumbles in her hand. The guy runs away after he sees people chasing after him. She then wakes up to the weird funeral song playing on her phone. My mom didn't know if those dreams were real or not when she woke up. She never remembers her dreams. That night was just so full of weird occurrences. If they happened by themselves, I wouldn't think anything of it. There was just so much in a 12-hour span. It truly felt like we were not wanted there. And I've never felt that at the gorge.
Hello, folks. This is a tale of something, well, that happened to me out in the woods. I hesitated if I should tell you that something happened. It did not. This was something so vague and undefined as mere feelings out in a certain location just outside our small town. I have been back to the spot several times, and this thing tends to reoccur out there. I live in a rather small town with a population of just around 6,000 people. It's in the northern part of the county that borders Stockholm down in the south in Sweden. The thing is, I've been an amateur road cyclist since the summer of 2018. I find it useful, fun, adventurous, and an entertaining way to simply stay in shape. Over the last year, my thoughts have been drawn more and more to the concept of bikepacking. ditching that road bike or getting another gravel bike, donned some overnight equipment such as tents, sleeping mats, and a portable stove, and spent a night or two out in nature. This equipment is not cheap, and I've spent the last winter months acquiring more and more of stuff that might be needed come summer. One of these things is a hammock, combined with a tarp kind of like a roof overhead. You attach these things to two trees opposite each other, and sleep hanging basically, sheltered from nasty rain during the night by that tarp. You can't just buy these things and get out of there and use them for the first time when you really need them. It's good to practice a bit first, setting things up, knowing what should be placed where and etc. So I went out to this clearing in the woods that is actually bordering a little lake outside of town. It's kind of on a hill. The lower part of the woods have this circular running path actually circulating the place that I'm talking about. I've got the things up and working, everything's alright, but man, something is not right here. There's really no other way to put it. If something happened here in the past, I have no clue. It has not, according to what information I could gather as far back as I could. It's simply just a clearing in the woods. Well, as you can see, it has got some trees standing, but part of the biggest reason undergrowth and vegetation has not filled the place is that it's bedrock underneath and a pretty shallow layer of soil. Weirder still, it looks like someone has built kind of a wooden teepee-like structure of old branches and twigs and stuff. It was an awful feeling of being stared at, basically, and not with any welcoming intent. Nothing happened to me physically, and I left safe and all, but this place is visited. Not frequently perhaps, but it does obviously happen. The shallow bedrock, is that the only reason plants avoid this place? The larger trees that do grow, why do they grow so strange? What is going on here?
In 2010, I was 12 years old. My younger brother played baseball. I would attend the summer tournaments to play with friends on the nearby playground or in the woods. My mom worked in the concession stand. My dad was a coach. One day during tournament games, I wandered into the woods farther than I had before. This wasn't a big, vast forest. It was in the middle of a suburb. Although, as a kid, it seemed massive. I found a tree house. I was too scared to explore it alone, so I went back later with friends. We climbed inside the tree house. It was everything a kid could have wanted. After a while, we got bored and left. But as we were leaving, I felt like we were being watched. We started walking away from the treehouse, and two men burst from the bushes. We are a small trio of 12-year-olds. We started running and screaming. I tried not to look back. When I did, I saw something in their hands. I just kept running. My friend who wore flip-flops tripped and fell. We all stopped running and looked back. We were so close to the field, but still hidden by the vegetation and tall grass. We were unseen by all of the adults seated on the bleachers. They caught up to us so fast. We were screaming and crying. They had hatchets. But all they said was,
"We just really didn't want you to go into our deer blind."
They looked sheepish and nervous, realizing how close people were nearby. They took off. We all told our dads, sobbing. They ran into the woods with baseball bats, combing the forest, not finding anything. They accused us of lying. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that was not a deer blind. It was a treehouse, deliberately put into the middle of the woods, so that children would go inside. I ask myself a lot what could have happened to me if I had the courage to go into that treehouse alone. I didn't mention this in the story, but I think it's important. We were a group of very small, vulnerable girls. Danger is everywhere for young girls.
Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, disappear, and such. So yeah, my parents were legitimately afraid for me and were against the idea. I had to lie to them that we would be staying in a hotel near the Kazia National Park so they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did. Okay, so long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers in 2 hours by train. We got our immense backpacks and everything we needed and went our way. Nothing specifically happened in the train, except the fact that the train was overly crowded, with the exception of our train compartment being completely empty. That is extremely rare for a Romanian train. I got excited, thinking that we have the whole compartment to ourselves. As I said, it is a very rare thing to happen, and of course, after 10 to 20 minutes, it got occupied by a man entering our compartment, accompanied by a beautiful German shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats and dogs in particular, and I usually find my way around all animals, even those that don't like people. But not this dog. No, this dog was otherworldly. He looked so stuffed as if it was a stuffed animal, and he would listen to his owner's every single command. I was so impressed by it, so obviously I start asking the man about his dog, since it would be a long and awkward trip to do and have it in complete silence. The man was exactly like his dog, except the commands he would give to his dog. No other contribution to the conversation. He told me the dog's name was Ucigashul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give a dog because, for this particular example, we would use the English word as it is, not translate the word Romanian and name the dog like that. But I thought, to each their own. I asked him why such a scary name, and he bluntly replied, "This dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing he likes and is good at." Now, I personally consider that the dog will grow up to have similar personality to his owner, and most of the times, I would judge people with dogs on how the animal reacts to the world and to his owner. And let me tell you guys, these two did not give a good vibe in return. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is training his dog to hunt in the woods. Then, I started thinking which woods are legal to hunt in our country. While I was thinking of that, the guy out of nowhere asked us if we were traveling to the Kazia National Park. That was surprisingly accurate, considering that the only time we mentioned the place was in the train station long before we found our seats, and way longer before we even met this man. Again, I thought it was nothing because in my country, people who happen to go in the same direction will try to make a small talk and guess where you're heading. Of course, you can just lie to keep safe of your destination or be honest, but I took the honesty route and I am judging myself for that. Never be too honest with strangers. or honest at all after you read this story. We confirmed that we are going to that place and asked what else is to see around, since he started talking about the area. And well, considering that we knew nothing about that place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals that we can encounter, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we need to climb, also advised us to visit the L'Autre Shore waterfall and explore the caves behind it and to try out the local restaurant. When this guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing a pleasant memory, but he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck. Squeezing it tight, the collar made a loud clink sound. But what surprised me was that the dog made no move, no whimper, no twitch, nothing, just like a stuffed animal. Anyway, we reached our destination, say our goodbyes, and the man waves at us, and we faced against him to go on our way. I turned around back right away because I wanted to ask where exactly that restaurant was. And the man and dog were no longer there. And not just that, but also his luggage was gone. That creeped me out a bit, but who cares? We were too thrilled for our first camping experience. We start walking with our backpacks on us, 10 kilograms each, and reach a tunnel digging into the mountain. It looked amazing, exactly like those horror movie tunnels, which, if traveled during the night, would make your hair stand straight. Lucky for me, we traveled during daytime. It wasn't a long tunnel. We could see the end, but by the time we got to the middle of it, we heard a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life. We stop, and my boyfriend looks at me with this, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us," that type of face, and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog and I go right towards the sound, and in the middle of the road, I see a chubby puppy with lots of white and brown circles on his butt, crying so hard and laying on the cement looking really hurt, as if it was hit by a car. I freeze and I think to myself that our trip is over, that I must save this dog. We call for him. He looks at us, pointy ears up, gets up, and like a doofus, and starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid, and we called him Rudolph, and now he was our camping buddy. But like 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy, probably his sister, which we dragged from the nearby river. Someone threw her in the river to kill her. All wet, cold, and hungry, of course, we take her too. So here we are, 10-kilogram backpacks each, and 2 puppies at my chest, my boyfriend with a map, trying to find a spot to camp the first night. We passed by the monastery the man in the train mentioned, but because we had these puppies, we couldn't enter inside the building. The priest wouldn't allow us, so we just walked around the property, through the gardens until we reached the base of the mountain that we had to climb. I would like to mention that these puppies were 2 tiny little brats because the second you put them down and force them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts to the ground and cry. Ah, such drama. We walk and walk and walk until we decide to stop because it was getting late and I was beginning to get cold. We found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage in the middle of the woods. We call it Troyanitsa. It's like a scouting post, but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible, stuff like that inside to bring good energy to the area. It belongs to the church, It wasn't like a house. It was basically a roof with 4 small walls and an opening, not even a door you could go into, like hide from the rain or something. There was an icon inside and a Bible with pages ripped from it. Curious as I am, I opened the Bible and was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names on it, like couples do on trees. But on one particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out. It was written in red ink. Again, I thought to myself that it was probably someone who wanted to scare travelers with silly messages. I put the book back and gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, make the fire, unpack, make food and eat. We feed the puppies, which are now cuddled up in our tent, and finally darkness starts to rise all around us. My boyfriend always kept the fire up every hour because when it went off, it felt as if all the sounds in the woods were louder and closer to us than in reality. Now, it's around 12 a.m. and we are all in the tent cuddling to keep warm. The puppies wake up and start crying. I get up and unzip the tent and put them out to pee. They do, and I get them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one starts shivering. At the same time, I hear grunting from behind our tent. My boyfriend is up too, and he hears it as well. The fire is fading, and the moment he unzips the tent and steps out, the sound disappears into the woods. It sounded like a snake slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but with unimaginable speed. I ask him, "Was that a snake?" He says, up to this day, that he cannot explain what he saw. He says it was a slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies come back down after this creature runs into the woods. We try to go back to sleep after we reignite the fire, and it's 3 a.m. this time when we wake up because the puppies are being fussy again. The fire is nearly dead. We clearly have no idea how to put up a sustaining fire, we think to ourselves. So my boyfriend gets up to search for firewood, and I get out as well. I stare into the darkness, and I swear to God, I hear whispers coming from between the trees. I look up at the sky, considering it's 3 a.m., and hear birds being very loud and fluttering their wings. Now, I'm no expert in birds, but don't they usually sleep around this time? Well, these weren't. They were very active, very vocal, and very frustrated. I look at the fire and follow the red sparks popping out of it into the sky and become fascinated with something. The spark doesn't seem to die. It goes on and on, changing color from hellish red to green. This was very out of the ordinary for me because it created an illusion that's hard to explain. It looked as if the fire sparks were going into the woods, creating a track for me, probably to follow, and I kept looking after each spark to see where it burns out. None of them did. They would levitate, turn green, and flow into the woods. At that moment, I began to get goosebumps on my skin. The birds being agitated, the mysterious light pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us has eyes on them. Like the trunks had a distinguished shape that looked exactly like eyes. I know, this is nothing paranormal since someone explained that those shapes form when a branch is ripped from the root, and that's the shape that is left after. But there were so many, like 100 eyes, all looking at the exact spot where we decided to camp, having only that religious tiny landmark to mentally protect us. and as I inspect my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, like 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground, but I don't go near it. Suddenly, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, and half inside the bush and half outside, stares at us. I call my boyfriend and we're like, "What the fuck is that? Is it a bear cub? A wolf? A pig?" The creature shakes its head the same way a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguished clink, like a dog collar. At this time, my boyfriend manages to light up the fire really big, which scares this animal to run back into the woods, through the bush from which it initially came out of. That calms us down, but not enough to ever close our eyes again during the night. Going back into the tent, my boyfriend falls asleep. The puppies are sound asleep, but not me. I keep the zipper on the tent open a little, just enough to have my eye peek through it right at the early mentioned bush. I think I spent a solid hour staring and falling asleep to that bush. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who is now peeking through the hole in complete darkness with me. And what we see next still haunts my dreams. From the exact same bush, we see a human head popping out and looking towards our tent. Note that our peeping hole was small enough to not make it look like you were being watched from the inside of the tent. This head is slowly coming out of the bush, skin so white we thought it was a ghost. After that, a shoulder, another shoulder, a full torso, and a leg. Bit by bit, an entire man emerges from the bush, completely naked, lighted by both the moon and our fire. What he did next was excruciatingly scary for me. He comes so close to our tent and begins to remove branches, rocks, and etc. from our fire, basically extinguishing our fire by dismantling it. This happens like 2 to 3 meters from our tent. I look at the man with horror because I recognize him. And now, the clink I heard earlier from that animal is explained. It was the same man from the train with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us, and I don't know if he just went the same route as us and found us and decided to stalk us. But this guy was there since 12 a.m. at least, because our fire would be dead every 2 to 3 hours, and we would be woken up by the sound of branches being cracked, rocks being moved, which we internally explained as animals crossing the land. After he successfully managed to put out our fire, he slowly crept back into the same bush, submerging into it bit by bit, only until his head would be out, with a disfigured-looking mouth looking like a moaning ghost. You'd try going back to sleep after that. We didn't know what to do, so we just got back out, reignited the fire, light ourselves some torches, and stayed near the campfire until the first rays of the sun came up. I admit, I did fall asleep while sitting down next to the fire, and so did my boyfriend, but any sound would wake us up. I was too afraid to go near that distanced bush. I did not need any answers, any explanations. I just wanted daylight to get the fuck out of there. And we did. We packed our stuff and we got the hell out of there. We planned for a 4-day camping trip, and this experience made us give up after the first night. It was a risk that we did not intend to take. If that guy followed us, or if it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin it all. As a conclusion to my story, and an advice to any first-time campers out there, Never tell your location or even areas remotely close to your destination to strangers. You don't know where their minds take them and what they end up to do. Always stay safe. Always be aware of your surroundings and any changes that come to you under the form of sounds, movements, changes of temperature, and so on. And always protect yourself.
I'm not sure if I'm in the right place. I've held this story in for the last 6 years, because it sounds crazy. And I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back, and had dinner. It was all very normal. Until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night, so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and I felt fine. I had slept hard, and from inside the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown, and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces, laying next to a tree. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet, not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before, and that an animal got in our stuff. I promised that I had locked it, and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack. But they weren't there. I found them later, on the ground, right next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home, and told me that he had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again. Said he didn't want to talk about it, and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night.
This happened in summer of 2008. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. That is going to require some explanation, because I live in rural western Pennsylvania, and all you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh and Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably isolated in a forest somewhere too. My family did okay in spite of the economically depressed area that we lived in. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine, it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever. You might think I was only friends with this kid because of the stuff he had, but honestly, that isn't true. He was probably in the top 5 of nicest people that I have ever met, and his family is also amazing. They took me in for a while when my mom was in the hospital once, and I still keep in touch with them. So, rich guy, good guy, etc., he had a lot of friends. His birthday parties were pretty legendary among the kids in our town. Usually, they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projectors inside, along with a soft serve ice cream machine and slushy machine. The party in 2008, I think my friend was turning 14 and I was 13, was a little more low-key. There were a few less people than normal, and there weren't any tents and projectors. We played video games for the first part of the night, and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can vary depending on who's playing. My friends and I used to play it like group hide and seek. The hiders would go hide in the dark, sometimes alone, and sometimes together if there was a great spot. The seekers got the flashlights and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the treehouse as well as climbing some of the trees inside the yard itself. The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop car drove by. Obviously, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to explain why we were sneaking around a house at 11 at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a couple miles down the road, has some wooded areas around it as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's backyard, there is about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of this is going to be important in a little bit. On this particular time, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide, and we were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out of the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back to the house. They went inside, and my group, who was really confused at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening. Their story went like this. That round, they had all decided to hide back in the woods since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of paces inside, but were still in the side of the house. Looking farther inside the woods, they caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little while to figure out what they were looking at in the dark. They thought it might be a tree, or a deer, or something. But they kept focusing on it. When they were sure the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinted back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off into the woods to check the situation out himself. And they stopped him and said that they should only go back to check as a group or to wake up his parents who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this to be pretty fun in a weird way. It was like being in a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low-crime neighborhood, and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. and even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare. So we came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring my friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever collie mix and was the furthest thing from a guard dog. Unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid with the other walkie-talkie ready to wake my friend's parents up or to call the cops. I wasn't taking the situation very well, but didn't really show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside, while I'm usually a nervous wreck on the inside. I at least attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state as the original first group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. And this is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original first group had done. It took a few minutes of searching since the figure had been spotted in the thicker brush that wasn't easy to reach. One of the kids had swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something. Before yelling and running back to the house, some of the other boys who had gotten the same glimpse inside a flashlight beam behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were that of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently, he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare down at them from behind the tree. It was at this point that my friend's mom finally came downstairs after all the commotion. We explained the situation to her. Afterwards, she locked all of the doors and told us to stay inside and to tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that that part of the woods that we were going into was probably not their land anyway. They just had the closest house to it. Needless to say, I did not sleep well that night. We were situated on air mattresses in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one. And just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone else was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mom was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and had not seen anything amiss. They were all on a little edge, but things were pretty normal besides that. When my parents came to pick me up, I was reminded of the fact that I only lived about 2 miles from my friend's house. It was a walk that took 10 minutes or less, and even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while. I just kept thinking of how easy it would be for that man in the woods to show up in my yard. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, and I'm playing video games at my friend's house again. I bring up the subject, but he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was really pretty short with me. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his normal personality at all, but he did come up with a short explanation though. Apparently, one of his neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall, with long hair. My friend explained that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that this kid has seen us playing and hid in the woods to scare us. That did make me feel a little better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there is a good chance that's what actually happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when someone is trying to scare you, there's a got ya moment at the end. Like most people want to reveal that the whole thing was good-natured, or they just want to show you how dumb you look over nothing. Back when we had our sleepovers in tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping in to see if he had scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident. This person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, wherein his only pleasure was knowing that he scarred us for life. Or, if this kid really did have problems, maybe he just didn't understand how pranks typically went. His explanation also brought back an old memory of mine. I had been going to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friend and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yards. We played a game of basically dodgeball with moldy apples thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It absolutely nailed my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside where his parents asked me what was wrong, and I told them about the game and the neighbor kid. When he had finished crying, his parents scolded him and said that they had warned him about this kid. They just said that the neighbor's kid was not nice. For the record, he did not have long hair, but this was a number of years prior to the incident. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on, which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not among the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was just worried that I wouldn't want to come to his house anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time that I had a sleepover at my friend's house. That wasn't really because of the incident, but because we were entering high school and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, and that makes a pretty creepy story on its own. The alternatives are even more frightening. I don't even want to think about what kind of guys go stalk teenagers in the woods in the middle of the night. So, whether you were a creepy neighbor or a creepy mystery person, let's not meet. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I would also like to thank my following patrons: Ralph, Tasha, Fire05, Gabriel, Eskimono, Silver Threads, Sevenfold, Moschino, and Lori. Thank you very, very much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you can be a patron too. But remember, it's appreciated, but never Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.